Okay, good evening. So this is our discussion of the last and final topic for the coverage of the prelim exam. And this is the skeletal system covering the bones and the joints of the human body. So let us start our discussion. So the skeletal system is composed not only of the bones, but also the associated cartilages, tendons, and ligaments. Okay. So together, ah, okay, the bones are supported, no, by our cartilages, our tendons, and our ligaments, forming our skeletal system and performing its function as the main framework of the human body. Okay, aside from being the main framework, no, of the human body, our skeletal system provides mainly for body support. Okay? It is also vital for organ protection, okay? For body movement, for storage of minerals, okay? And also for blood cell production. Yes, our blood cells are produced within our bone marrow, specifically within our red bone marrow. Ah, and in terms of the minerals stored in our skeletal system, particularly in our bone, no, you have your calcium and phosphates. Calcium and phosphates are primarily stored in our bones, and we will be discussing the regulation of the storage of those minerals as we go on with our topic. Okay, so let us first have the histology of bone tissue. Ah, and as we have said in our discussion of connective tissues, bones, cartilage, wait lang ha. Okay. Bones, cartilage, tendons, and ligaments of the skeletal system are all connective tissues. And we all have discussed that under connective tissues. Di ba? We said ligaments and tendons are classified under connective tissue proper. If you remember your dense collagenous and dense elastic connective tissue under connective tissue proper. While bone and cartilage, no? Okay? And bones and cartilage, no? Ito naman yung supporting connective tissues, if you remember the classification. And as we all said, under connective tissues, no? Okay, they are classified or described according to the composition of their extracellular matrix. But in all of those types, no, of connective tissues, bone, cartilage, tendons, and ligaments, they always contain collagen, ground substance, and other organic molecules as well as water and minerals. No, ganun sa skeletal system natin. No? Again, collagen, you already know what is collagen from your connective tissues, ground substance, and other organic molecules as well as water and minerals. And we will be mentioning the details of those organic molecules in the next few slides. So collagen, no, as we recall, is a fibrous protein that provides flexibility, but resists pulling or compression. Oh, okay. In our bones, in our cartilages, in our tendons and ligaments, all of which have collagen. Yun nga lang, okay? The amount of collagen differs in all of those tissues. That is why those tissues have different levels of flexibility and also different levels of hardness. Ah, aside from collagen, you also have matrix ground substance, which contains mainly proteoglycans, which are water-trapping proteins or water-loving proteins na tinatawag nating hydrophilic that help the cartilage to be smooth and resilient. So ibig sabihin na itong ground substance that contains proteoglycans are more numerous or mas marami siya in the cartilage as compared to bone tissue. And that is the reason why cartilage are more smooth and resilient as compared to bone tissues. While yung tendons and ligaments, their extracellular matrix contain more amounts of collagen fibers. Di ba collagen fibers, as we have mentioned in our connective tissues, these are rope-like proteins, no? Which makes this structure very tough, like ropes and cables. Okay? So in all of those tissues found in the skeletal system, again, bone, cartilage, tendons, and ligaments, you will find collagen, matrix, no? Okay? Extracellular or matrix ground substance. Ah? Okay. Now, if we will look at our bone matrix, so specific na tayo sa bone matrix na, no? We will look specifically at our bone matrix. So the matrix of our bone tissue is about 35% organic and 65% inorganic material by weight. That is the reason why, no? Bone tissue is one of the tissues in the body that decomposes, no? That will take a long period of time to decompose. So kung makikita nyo naman, after 5 years, no, of death, skeleton, no, of the remains, no, of the dead people, no, the skeleton is still there, no, because it's made up 65% of inorganic material. And the organic materials are primarily collagen and proteoglycans, while the inorganic material that makes it hard to decompose is your calcium phosphate crystals that is called hydroxyapatite. No? Calcium hydroxyapatite. And that makes our bone tough and hard and not easily it makes it hard for the bones to easily decompose. So hindi basta-basta na-decompose. Kaya yan ang natitira. Nabulok na yung muscles, nabulok na yung internal organs, nabulok na yung skin, tendons and ligaments and cartilages. But the bone tissue remains for a long period of time. Okay, even in lower forms of animals, di ba? It becomes fossilized pa nga. Di ba? It becomes fossilized to the point that it becomes preserved naturally, inside yung mga rocks or underneath, the ground for thousands of years. It's because, again, of the presence of that mineral called calcium phosphate crystal that is called hydroxyapatite. Okay? Now, uh, as we have said earlier, the organic material is collagen and proteoglycan, while the inorganic material is the mineral calcium. So, yung collagen, the organic material, lends flexible strength to the bone tissue. But because of the mineral component, it gives bone the compression strength. Yung weight-bearing strength. Yun ang resulta ng presence of hydroxyapatite. Okay, so we're done with the bone matrix. Ulitin ko, the matrix is composed of 35% organic and 65% inorganic. Organic is collagen and proteoglycans. Inorganic is calcium hydroxyapatite. Now let us go to bone cells. What are those cells that primarily make up our bone tissue? Okay, so we have different types of cells that you will find in your bone tissues. You have number one, osteoblasts. Number two, you have your osteocytes. So ulitin natin, osteoblast, osteocytes, and then you have your osteoclasts. So ano yung tatlong klaseng bone tissues na yan? Okay, so first you have your osteoblasts. Okay? No? Oh, ayan siya. Ah, these are your osteoblasts. Okay. Osteoblasts are responsible for the formation of bone and the repair and remodeling of bone. Because our bone tissue is one of those living tissues in the body, no, that is continuously remodeled and that is continuously formed. Continuous ang formation, continuous ang remodeling. So the cells responsible for the continuous formation, repair, and remodeling of bone tissue are your osteoblasts. Ayan ang osteoblasts natin. And osteoblasts produce collagen and proteoglycans. So that is how osteoblasts now contribute in the formation of bone tissue and also in the repair and remodeling by producing collagen and proteoglycans. And at the same time, osteoblasts secrete high concentrations of calcium and phosphate ions. Combining calcium and phosphate ions will result to the formation of hydroxyapatite. Di ibig sabihin, kung mapapansin nyo, what did we say earlier? What is the main component of bone matrix? The collagen and hydroxyapatite. Saan nanggagaling pareho? Yung collagen and hydroxyapatite. They are both produced by osteoblasts. Through the process called ossification. The formation of new bone by osteoblasts is called ossification. Again, continuous, that is continuously taking place because our bone, as long as we are living, is continuously being remodeled. Then next, you have your osteocytes. Ito naman ang ating osteocytes. Osteocytes are cells that maintain bone matrix. And they form from osteoblast after the bone matrix has surrounded it. So ibig sabihin, we can consider osteocytes are mature bone cells while osteoblasts are still immature and still forming. And osteocytes account for 90 to 95% of the bone cells present in our body, in our skeletal system. And osteocytes, or osteocyte cell bodies, when you look at our bone tissue under the microscope, ang mga osteocytes can be found inside the spaces in our bone matrix, and those spaces is called lacunae. Lacuna pag singular, lacunae, you put a letter E if it's plural. Nasaan yung lacunae na yun? Let us enlarge this drawing. Okay. So if you will look at the individual or at the matrix, if you will look at the matrix of our bone tissue, ito yun, yung mga spaces na maliliit na yan, those are called lacunae. And inside those lacunae are the bone cells that maintain our bone tissue Okay? And that is called osteocytes. And then, no, those lacunae, teka muna, enlarge natin, are interconnected, no, to each other by tiny canals that are called canaliculi. O mamaya let's see in the next slide kung may wala pala. Mamaya di-discuss natin ano ba yung canaliculi, no? And we will have, no, a larger picture of that. Pero yung canaliculi, no, these are the tiny canals basically. These are the tiny canals that interconnects, no, yung mga lacunae to each other. Like for example, dito, ah, uh, your osteocytes are located inside the lacunae. Drawing muna natin. Lagyan natin ng lacunae dito. Each osteocytes, no, are housed within each lacunae. Ngayon, each lacunae, no, are interconnected to each other by tiny canals called, okay, itong mga tiny canals na to, these are called canaliculi. Di ba? Canaliculi. No? Pag canaliculi, it means tiny canals. So we already had the two types of bone cells. So number one, you have your osteoblasts. So you already know what is an osteoblast and what is the function of the osteoblast. Number two, you have your osteocytes. So you already know what are osteocytes and what is the function of osteocytes. So finally, we will have your osteoclasts. Osteoclasts, they are bone destroying cells. They destroy bone tissue. They destroy collagen, proteoglycans, and calcium hydroxyapatite. Okay, they do that in order to remodel cells. By removing existing bone, they remove existing bone, okay, in the process called reabsorption. Okay? And they do that by breaking down bone tissue so that they can mobilize yung calcium, no? Because we also need calcium in our blood. When the osteoclasts break down bone tissue, no, they tend to mobilize now the calcium stored in your bone tissue. And as bone is broken down, calcium goes into our blood. So it happens when the calcium levels in our blood decreases, because calcium in our blood is very important for several functions. It is important for muscle contraction. It is important for the heartbeat, and so many functions. So when the levels of calcium in our blood or in our body decreases, the osteoclasts become very, very active in breaking down calcium. Calcium tuloy. In breaking down bone tissue in order to release more calcium in our blood. So in a way, no? Okay, yung bone is parang siya yung nagsasacrifice in order to provide, no, more calcium to our blood and to provide more calcium to our other organs needing it. So, pag bumagsak naman ang calcium in our bone tissue, what will happen? It will make the bones brittle, easily fractured. Di ba? So, yun ang mangyayari. It results to a condition known as osteoporosis. Okay? So that is the reason why, no, in order to prevent that from happening, especially among older people, no, there should be enough intake of calcium minerals, no? So that, no, okay, osteoclasts will not be that very active in breaking down bone tissue to produce or to release more calcium in our blood. Para hindi magkaroon ng osteoporosis. So again, you have three types of bone tissue or bone cells, your osteoblasts, osteocytes, and osteoclasts. Okay, now we have two types of bone tissue. You have according to its structural or structure, two types of bone tissue according to structure. You have your spongy bone and your compact bone. No? Oh, okay. So, a mature bone, by the way, is called a lamellar bone. No? It's called lamellar because if you will look at its matrix, the matrix is arranged in concentric rings, no, of matrix called lamellae. This is a compact bone. Kung titingnan mo, they are arranged in concentric rings called lamellae. This is a spongy bone. And if you will look at a piece of spongy bone, the matrix is also arranged in concentric rings called lamellae. So therefore, a mature bone is called a lamellar bone. Okay? So, what is the difference between a spongy and a compact bone? A spongy bone has less bone matrix and more space than compact bone. Kaya makikita mo dito, if this is a compact bone, makikita nyo, it has less space. Ayan, ito compact bone yan. Yung nasa gitna, spongy bone. So as you can see, spongy bone have more spaces inside, no, than compact bone. Okay. What is the purpose of that? Why do spongy bone have more spaces? Because those spaces are filled with bone marrow and blood vessels. What kind of bone marrow? It's your red bone marrow. It's your red bone marrow ang nandyan. And what is the main purpose of your red bone marrow? It is for the production of new blood cells. That is why earlier in our introduction, di ba, sa simula natin, one of the functions of the skeletal system is for production of new blood cells. That is why, di ba, in cases of severe leukemia, mga leukemia patients, one of the treatments or management for leukemia, di ba, sa leukemia is actually cancer of the blood. Di ba? One of the treatment is bone marrow transplant. No? Bone marrow transplant because it's in the red bone marrow where the new blood cells are produced. Okay? Now, so that is your spongy bone. Now, compact bone, also known as cortical bone, is the solid outer surrounding layer of each bone. Di ba? Yun ang compact bone. Usually, makikita mo yan sa outer layer of all bones in the body. And the functional unit of a compact bone is an osteon. Just like what you see here in the picture, bawat isang bilog. Pag sinilip mo kasi ang compact bone in the microscope, this is what you are going to see. Ito yung makikita natin. No, and you will see that it is the arrangement of the matrix is in concentric rings called lamellae. At marami kang makikitang ganyan in a compact bone. 1, 2, ayan, 3, tabi-tabi lahat yan, yung concentric rings na yan. And each unit or each small unit composed of concentric rings is called an osteon. Bawat isang bilog na yan, ito. It's called an osteon. So makikita mo dito, ang dami. There are numerous units of osteon. And an osteon is composed of concentric rings of matrix surrounding a central canal. And this is your central canal. Ha? Oh. Enlarged view lang yan, ha? Because that is microscopic. Ha? Okay? So what does the central canal contain? Oh, the central canal usually contains blood vessels. Microscopic, no? Blood vessels. Ha? Okay? So, as we have said no, earlier, when you look at it under the microscope, in between those layers of concentric rings, ayan, dito tayo sa diagram, ayan, you will find tiny spaces. Tiny spaces which contains our bone cells, no? Your osteocytes. Oh, ayan, nandyan sa loob niyan yung osteocytes. Okay? And what do you call those spaces? Oh, nasabi na natin kanina. Those spaces are called lacunae. And those lacunae are interconnected to each other by tiny canals. Oh, anong tawag natin dun sa mga tiny canals na yun? We already have said that earlier. And that is your canaliculae, no? Or canaliculi. What is the purpose of the canaliculi? Canaliculi connects osteocytes to one another, no? Which functions to transport nutrients and remove waste products. Oh. So that is the main difference between a spongy bone, ito sa spongy bone, yan ang arrangement ng bone tissue. At ito naman ang sa compact bone. So what is the main difference? The main difference is that sa spongy bone, there is no central canal in the middle. There is no central canal. Ito may central canal eh. What does the central canal contain again? Blood vessels. Di ba? So does it mean that your spongy bone does not have any blood vessels? No, because the blood vessels of the spongy bone are located in those spaces, right where the red bone marrow is also located. Okay, so that is the difference between your spongy bone and your compact bone. Okay, so let us now take a look at the structure of our long bones. No? Okay, it is very important for us to discuss this because it is in our long bones where our growth in terms of height or our length takes place. So what are the main parts? What are the main parts of a long bone? It has two main parts. The shaft or the diaphysis, diaphysis, and yung both ends of a long bone is called the epiphysis. The shaft is the diaphysis or yung bias sa Tagalog. Yung epiphysis, yung magkabilang dulo ng dalawang buto ng magbuto natin. Laging dalawa ang epiphysis on both ends, no? So again, the diaphysis is the center portion, and usually composed of compact bone surrounding a hollow center called the medullary cavity. Ito yung medullary cavity. Hollow yan sa loob. In the medullary cavity usually contains bone marrow also, but not red bone marrow. It contains yellow bone marrow. Yung tinatawag yung bulalo sa Tagalog. That's the yellow bone marrow. Okay? No? And then the end of the long bones are called epiphysis. And epiphysis, as we have said earlier, ayan yan, contains primarily spongy bone. But the outer layer is still covered by compact bone. Di ba? Kaya makinis pa rin yung labas eh. ng epiphysis because it is still covered with compact bone. So again, what are the two main parts of a long bone? The diaphysis or the shaft, and then on both ends, you have the epiphysis. No? Laging dalawa yan. Oh, no? By the way, bakit dalawa po yung drawing dyan? Yung letter A is a drawing of a bone of young children, growing children. And then letter B is a drawing of an adult bone. Okay? So later we will be discussing the difference between a young bone and an adult bone. Okay, so let us continue. If you will look at the epiphysis, and epiphysis, it is covered with a layer of cartilage, no, which is called an articular cartilage. And specifically, it's made up of hyaline cartilage. Okay? Now, in young bone, so ito na ngayon, yung difference between a young bone and an adult bone. Ano yung difference na yun? Dito makikita yung difference na yan. In young bone, nakikita niyo itong kulay white na plate na to. Okay? Well, in an adult, wala na yung plate na yan. It's just replaced by a very, very thin line. In young bone, that thick plate is called an epiphyseal plate. And that epiphyseal plate is also made up of hyaline cartilage. And that epiphyseal plate serves as a growth plate for long bones. Ibig sabihin, that is where growth of long bones in terms of length occurs. Kaya tumatangkad, mga bata, tumatangkad, hanggang sa age of skeletal maturity, and that is around 18 to 21 years old. But as you reach adulthood, the cartilage present in the epiphyseal plate are being turned over to bone tissue hanggang maubos na siya. Hanggang linya na lang ang matira. Kaya linya na lang ang natira sa adult. That's why upon reaching around 21 years old, you can no longer grow in terms of height. It's because the cartilage present in your epiphyseal plate is already used up. Na turn over na siya into bone tissue. So, yung epiphyseal plate becomes now ossified and becomes epiphyseal line. Linya na lang siya. Naubos na kasi yung cartilage. Okay, so that is the difference between a young bone and an adult bone. That is why, actually sa X-ray makikita yan. Pag ang mga bata, pagka pina-X-ray yan, nagpa-X-ray, those epiphyseal plates are actually very, very evident. Can be seen on a radiograph or a plain X-ray. So let us continue. So cavities in a spongy bone and the medullary cavity in the diaphysis are filled with soft tissue called marrow. Sabi nga natin, may dalawang marrow, di ba? The red bone marrow and the yellow marrow. Where do you find the red marrow? The red bone marrow is found in those small cavities of spongy bone. And it is very important for formation of new blood cells. Di ba? Nandyan yun formation of new blood cells. While the yellow bone marrow is found in the intramedullary cavity, which is made up mainly of fats or yung bulalo. Di ba? That's why storage of fats is one of the functions of the skeletal system. Okay? Now, sige, let us continue. Yan. Okay. So, let us discuss the process of bone formation. no? The physiological term, no, for bone formation is called ossification. Oh, and when does ossification take place? Ossification takes place, no, inside the womb, no, as a fetus, no, continues to develop. Oh, in the fetus, ah, bone formation takes place in two forms or two processes. One is intramembranous ossification, and the other one is enchondral ossification. Ah, Intramembranous was so named intramembranous because it starts within embryonic connective tissue membranes. Oh, meaning, kasi when an embryo is being formed, di ba, that is one stage, no, of formation of the human organism while inside the womb, di ba? Oh, before being a fetus, first embryo muna. And and that embryo, no, is made up of different types of tissues, and one of those tissues, no, are connective tissue membranes. So when ossification takes place within embryonic connective tissue membranes. So therefore, it's called intramembranous ossification. While if the bone formation or ossification takes place within a cartilage model, sabihin, naggaling siya sa cartilage, then that ossification is called endochondral ossification. No? Endo means inside. Chondral meaning cartilage. Oh, ossification takes place within the cartilage is called endochondral ossification. And both types, no, of ossification results in both compact and spongy bone tissue. Ah, So let us first discuss the process of intramembranous ossification. Oh, oh, okay. So, anong sabi natin? No? Which bone cells, no, produce bone tissue? We said earlier that it is osteoblast. So therefore, intramembranous ossification occurs when osteoblasts begin to produce bone within a connective tissue. At ang pinakamagandang example niyan sa fetus is when the bones of the skull, no, are forming. No? When the bones of the skull starts to form, okay, it begins in connective tissue membranes that encloses the brain of the forming fetus. Here, osteoblasts begins to line up the surface of the connective tissue fibers, and begin depositing bone matrix to form a trabeculae. Kaya na-form ngayon yung mga flat bones of the skull. Kaya yung mga flat bones of the skull na yan, they do not start cartilaginous. They do not start with the cartilage, but rather a membranous connective tissue. Okay? Then, no, after, no, it is deposited with bone matrix. So after it is deposited, no, with bone matrix, then the process, no, begins in areas called ossification centers. Like for example here in this drawing, this is the ossification center of the frontal bone, while this is the ossification center of the parietal bone. And as you can see, no, bone formation takes place from inside going to the outside hanggang lumaki na ng lumaki yung bone until the edges of those flat bones meet together. Hanggang magtagpo na yung edges nila, no? Resulting, no, to the fusion of those edges as they enlarge. Ah, ganun ngayon ang nangyayari, no? Hanggang mag-meet-meet na yung edges nila. Hanggang, no, the skull becomes now a closed vault that completely encloses and protects the brain. Okay? Now, the second type of bone formation is called enchondral bone formation. And as we have said earlier, endo, then chondral, meaning inside a cartilage model. Here, a cartilage is replaced by bone. And usually, no, nagpo-form muna ng primary ossification center. And usually, in long bones, the primary ossification center forms in the diaphysis, yung nasa gitna, yung nasa shaft. While a secondary ossification center forms in the epiphysis. If you will look at this drawing, most long bones in the body, no, forms or starts within a cartilage model. And during bone formation, no, the ossification center, the primary ossification center begins in the shaft or in the diaphysis. And as development continues, no, kung yung primary ossification center is in the shaft, the secondary ossification center is in the epiphysis. And that is the reason why, as development continues, as the secondary ossification center enlarges, there will be a plate of cartilage that will be left in between the epiphysis and the diaphysis in a young bone. And that plate of cartilage is called, ano sabi natin kanina? What do you call that plate of cartilage? No? Between the epiphysis and the diaphysis in a growing bone, that is called the epiphyseal plate. And as we have said earlier, that epiphyseal plate will be the main site of growth of our bones in terms of length, and it is turned over to bone tissue. It becomes bone tissue as the bone grows in length. And pag naubos na yung epiphyseal plate na yon, then it will just become a line, your epiphyseal line. So that is the process of endochondral ossification, of a long bone. Okay? So these are the steps, no, in endochondral ossification. Okay? In a cartilage model, you cannot call it osteoblasts yet. No? So, ang nagfo-form, no, ng cartilage model are called chondroblasts. Okay? No? And then the chondroblasts, no, become chondrocytes. Sila ngayon yung bumubuo ng cartilage model, your chondroblasts. And then when the cartilage model hardens, no, okay, it is actually secondary to calcification, meaning when they are deposited with calcium, no, they become harder, mas tumitigas. And then the osteoblasts will invade the calcified cartilage. When it is invaded by osteoblasts, a primary ossification center forms in the diaphysis. And this is what we are talking about. Ito yung ossification center na nabuo dun sa diaphysis. And after that, a secondary ossification center forms in the epiphysis. Ito ngayon yung pinakita natin kanina. And then, no, okay, original cartilage model, no, becomes now almost completely ossified, leaving just a plate, no, of cartilage, as we have said earlier, in between the epiphysis and the diaphysis. And again, this plate of cartilage is your epiphyseal plate, which serves as the growth plate of long bones. And then finally, ah, oh, pagka as you reach adulthood, as we have said, the plate of cartilage, no, mauubos din siya and is replaced by a line. No? Oh, that is why you no longer grow upon reaching uh, skeletal maturity. No? And that is around 21 years old. Okay? So bone growth, so as a result, di ba? Oh, while those cartilages are turned over into bone tissue, oh, okay, there is deposition of new bone lamellae onto existing bone. Oh, nadadagdagan ng bago, di ba? Nabadagdagan ng bagong lamellae onto the existing bone. Oh, and as osteoblasts deposit new bone matrix on the surface of bones between the periosteum and the existing bone matrix, the bone increases also in width and also in diameter. So therefore, no, kapag ka tayo ay when bones grow not only in terms of length but also in terms of width. And the process by which bones grow in terms of width is called appositional growth. Daan yung term na yan. That's called appositional growth. Okay? No? So na-discuss na natin yung growth in length. And as we have said earlier, growth in length happens through endochondral ossification. Yun yung nauna nating na-discuss. Let us continue. Okay. So as we have said earlier, no, bone is a living tissue that is continuously remodeled. Oh. And when we say bone remodeling, it is the process of the removal of existing bone and which cells functions for bone removal or bone resorption. It's your osteoclasts. And as the osteoclasts remove all bone tissues, new bone tissue is being deposited by your osteoblasts. And this bone remodeling continuously takes place in all of the bones in the body, and which is responsible for the changes in bone shape, bone repair, adjustment of bone to stress, and also in calcium regulation in the body. Oh, in terms of bone repair, kapag ka bone repair, kailan ba nangyayari ang bone repair, by the way? Bone repair takes place when our bones are fractured. Like for example here, if you will look at this X-ray, this is a broken humerus. Okay? And ito naman, after the humerus is completely healed. Okay? So, kasi, when our bone is fractured, it follows 4 stages. It follows several stages for a fractured bone to heal or to be able to repair itself. As you can see here in the drawing, fracture healing follows 4 main stages. And that is number 1, hematoma formation, callus formation, callus ossification, and bone remodeling. Ang involved dyan, yung osteoblasts and osteoclasts. So, how does hematoma formation take place? Hematoma formation takes place when the broken bone causes bleeding. Oh, okay. Yes, bones also bleed, not only soft tissues, because as you have seen in our pictures or illustrations earlier, di ba? Compact bones have central canals. And what do central canals contain? They contain blood vessels. So therefore, when bones are fractured, there will be bleeding. It is expected that there will be bleeding. And when those uh, blood forms clots, ah, a a large blood clot will be formed in between the fragments, and that large blood clot is called hematoma. So the first stage is hematoma formation. Ah, okay. Now, the second stage is when a callus forms. Ah, a callus is a term used for the bone cartilage network that will form between and around the bone fragments. And it usually replaces the hematoma. Ah, okay. And that is the reason why it's called callus formation. Oh, when that callus formation, what is the composition of the callus again? Cartilage network, fibers and cartilage. When that callus formation becomes ossified, no, meaning it is deposited with calcium. Oh, okay. Specifically, what type of bone, will replace the callus? It is replaced with woven and spongy bone. And that is called the third stage, or callus ossification. And the fourth and final stage uh, is when the spongy bone is replaced with compact bone. When spongy bone is replaced with compact bone, just like what you see in the picture, it's called bone remodeling. Na? Oh, okay. So it is it is usually when fracture is completely healed, no, during bone remodeling. Mm. Okay, so as you can see here in our illustration, oh, a fractured humerus after its reduction. By the way, when you say reduction, it is the surgical procedure. No, it is the procedure, not necessarily surgical. It is the procedure of realigning a fractured bone to its normal alignment. Reduction ang tawag doon. Reduction can be done through internal fixation, wherein no uh, a metal plates and screws are used in order to align the bone, or sometimes an external cast is done in order to maintain that alignment, di ba? And the main goal of that is to limit the movement in your bone tissue. Ha? Hindi siya nagagalaw para yung mafo-form na callus o matibay, no? Oh, and it will be ensured that it will successfully undergo ossification and remodeling. So remember those four stages of fracture healing. And let us continue. Okay. So as we have said earlier, one of the main functions of the skeletal system, particularly our bone, is to store calcium in the form of minerals, yung tinatawag nating hydroxyapatite, calcium hydroxyapatite. Oh, and as we have said earlier, one of the functions of the osteoclast, di ba? Osteoclast. Oh, if we already have decreasing level of calcium in our blood, ang gagawin ni osteoclast is to break down bone tissue so that the calcium from your bone tissue will be released to the blood in the form of calcium ions. Bakit? Oh, because no, calcium ions in the blood is needed by our skeletal and cardiac muscles so that they can contract. Ah, no. So that is very important for those functions. Oh, okay? Oh, kapag kulang ka sa calcium ions in your blood, then you can actually experience muscle weakness and you can actually experience problems of the heart in terms of the pumping action of the heart. And as we have said, bone is a major storage for calcium. Kasasabi ko lang kanina, kapag kulang ka ng calcium sa blood, saan kukuha ng calcium? Sa bone tissue. Doon ngayon magtatrabaho si osteoclast. Osteoclast. Oh, okay? No? Now, so ayun, ito yun, no? Calcium moves out of bone as osteoclast, break down bone. Pero if you have enough levels of calcium in the blood, like for example, uh, uh, you have enough amount of calcium in your diet, then calcium will be moved from your blood to your bone, oh, and will be used up by your osteoblasts to build bone tissue. Oh, sino yung it is actually maintained, no? This what do you call this levels, no, or balance uh, of calcium between our blood and our bone tissue, no, or yung tinatawag nating calcium homeostasis is maintained by parathyroid hormone and calcitonin, which are both secreted by your parathyroid glands. Oh, the parathyroid glands are the small glands located at the back of your thyroid gland. Okay? Oh, parathyroid gland, ang function niyan is that rather the parathyroid hormone, ang function niyan is to activate osteoclasts. Oh, pag na-activate ang osteoclast, what do? Oh, they reabsorb bone cells. So therefore, no, ang osteoclasts, ang gagawin niyan, will break down bone tissue para dumami yung calcium in our blood. So kailan nangyayari 'yon? Kailan tayo nagsisecrete ng parathyroid hormone? If you have low levels of calcium intake. When your calcium intake is very, very low, then your calcium levels in the blood becomes very, very low also. And that stimulates your parathyroid gland to secrete parathyroid hormone to activate your osteoclasts so that your osteoclasts will break down bone tissue so that it will release calcium in your blood. So, ang resulta tuloy, pag kulang ka sa calcium, osteoclast becomes very, very active, resulting to breakdown of bone tissues. And that makes your bone tissues brittle. Kasi isa sa mga nagpapatigas ng buto natin are calcium minerals. Ito namang calcitonin, is secreted from the C cells of the thyroid gland naman. Baliktad naman to. Ito naman, if you have too high calcium levels in your blood. Pag masyado namang mataas ang calcium levels sa blood, okay, your calcitonin naman will inhibit, baliktad naman yung gagawin niya. It will inhibit the osteoclastic activity. So therefore, when osteoclast activity decreases, there will be decreased breakdown of bone tissue. So therefore, less calcium will be released to your blood and it will just be stored in your bone tissue. In short, if you have enough calcium intake or enough calcium intake from your diet, then or halimbawa more than enough calcium intake in your diet, then calcitonin will be secreted. But if you have very, very low calcium intake in your diet, calcium levels in your blood will drop, then you will secrete more parathyroid hormones. Kaya pagka nag-secrete ka ng parathyroid hormones, magiging active ang osteoclast. Di ba? Will result to increased breakdown of your bone tissue. Okay? Yan. And that ends our discussion for the skeletal system. Yung mga parts, specific parts of the bone tissue will be discussed or has been discussed in the laboratory. No? Okay? So, this discussion will be part of the prelim exam in the lecture. Thank you.